All right, that's me. That's what we're going to talk about. My apologies, I got a little bit of a head cold. In case you can't hear, I usually don't sound this baritone. So let's get into it. Everybody knows this fancy gentleman. Is that a fair statement? Yeah. For no prizes. Anybody? There you go. And if you didn't know, the name was written down there for you. Anybody read the DevOps handbook? I thought it was like a prerequisite. You had to read it before you came into the conference. In the DevOps handbook, Gene Kim talks about his 3 ways, right? He talks about the third way being this idea of continuous learning, continuous experimentation, and kind of creating a culture of learning. What's cool about it is he actually references in there the Target Dojo, right? So like everybody knows Target, the company. They created this thing called the Dojo back 5 or 6 years ago. And so I was there helping them out. So this is kind of what this talk is about. This idea of dojos. Is anybody in here like running a dojo, heard of a dojo, doing it? No? Yeah? All right, cool. So there you go. I got 2 hands, so that's pretty good. So we'll talk about kind of what it is, how it works, why it works, and all that fun stuff, and get you kind of jazzed about doing your own stuff. That's kind of my intent. So if you don't know what a dojo is, so here it is in a nutshell, right? It's a place that whole teams come to learn new things while doing their work. Just kind of take it like that, right? Like you're all smart people, you're here, you've been to conferences, you've been to training before. Usually what happens, so I'll give you this. So I teach a lot of the stuff, right? So whether it be like test-driven design or microservices or any of these other things, I teach things, and I'm really good at it. But that really doesn't matter because when you go back to your organization, if your organization isn't a nice, clean sandbox, all of the things you learned in the class might not work that well. And so you learn cool things, but if you can't use it at work, it doesn't really matter. So the whole idea behind these dojos is like, let's learn things, but let's not ignore kind of the constraints of organization. Let's learn things by doing the things we need to do inside of our 4 walls and making things better. So that's what it is. It's a physical place. It's a way of practicing things. There you go. There's actually a dude here, not to toot his own horn, a gentleman named Jason Walker. Wonderful dude if you don't know him. I think he's actually talking tomorrow. Jason was there at Target with us early on. He can tell you more about kind of the naming and that kind of stuff. So there you go. If you haven't seen a dojo, now you can say you have. There you go. You're all certified. Go on and be merry. One of the things cool about this picture, this is at a company down in Texas, and this was their dojo. And so it's kind of got this nice kind of divide, right? Like on this left side, it looks more interesting than the right side, right? The right side is kind of like the boring, everybody sits in cubes, nobody talks to each other, everybody hates work kind of stuff. The reason why it looks like this is just because they couldn't afford to remodel the whole floor. So that just kind of give you kind of context. Like the organization mostly looks at the right side. Everybody kind of stares at blank walls all day. But the left side was the dojo. And the idea is that all these teams actually have to work together and they actually have to look at each other. And that's different for a lot of people. Is like they're not used to looking at the people they work with. But so now you've seen the kind of space. I'll show you some more pictures, but we're going to really get into like why this dojo thing is interesting. So I mentioned to you kind of in passing, look, you can take all the training and all the work you want. I've been doing this stuff for a while. I haven't seen anything be as impactful for teams or organizations than this kind of thing we're doing. Hopefully you'll get jazzed about it in a minute. That's what we're going to rip through. We did a little intro. We'll talk about what the problems we're actually trying to solve with these dojos actually are. We'll get into how to do it, how teams work. And here's the kicker. If you choose to do a dojo, and maybe for those of you that already have, if you choose to do a dojo, I guarantee you that the teams are going to learn things, and then your organization is going to learn a whole lot of things that they're going to have to solve. Because a lot of the things that teams are struggling with aren't necessarily the team's problems. They're like the organizational problems. And if you do these dojos well, you're going to find all those pain points pretty quick, And so your organization has to be ready for these dojos. We'll talk about how you can do your own, then any questions you have. All right, so that's me. You can tell by the picture. I've done this for a while. Feel free to throw stuff at me. Like, so prior to doing this dojo stuff, I know I was like one of those Agile coaches. Really don't like the Agile terms and stuff, but we'll talk about how that works. Prior to that, I was an architect at Red Hat for a few years in the early open shift days. I was an engineer on the board of options in Chicago. Anybody here have friends at the board of options? Good. It's a horrible place to work. If you have friends or family, tell them to quit. It's just not a good place to be. But I worked on low latency, high throughput systems, blah, blah, blah. I kind of got into the XP space, early 2000s. Yeah, that's me. All right, back to these DevOps and these value streams. So in the DevOps handbook, they talk about value streams. And I'm sure, look, the DevOps community talks about value streams all the time, right? Value streams, value streams, value streams. Totally cool, I get it. For me, the idea of a value stream starts from like you've identified some kind of opportunity. There's a customer that has a need. We don't know how we're going to solve it, but there's these opportunities to solve. And on the far side of the value stream, you have that customer actually being happy. It's actually solving a problem for somebody. That's the idea behind the value stream, right? And all the things along the way to get there. The challenge I've mentioned to Gene and to Jez a couple times is they talk about the value stream, but then they say, but we're only going to focus on this from when the code's committed to production. And that's cool if that's like your biggest constraint, but a lot of places I go and I've seen things, that's not the biggest constraint. And so we need to be a little bit broader. And so we think about these dojos, we're thinking about the entire value stream. And so don't get me wrong, teams are coming in and they're learning the DevOps stuff and they're learning pipelines and deployments and infrastructure as code. But they're learning it because it solves a purpose. It allows them to experiment. It allows them to do more, to learn more things about their product. It allows them to design better architectures. It's not just automate things to automate things. And so when we bring these teams into this dojo, we want them to understand not just how to write infrastructure as code, we want them to understand how all the skills that go around delivering value actually intertwine. So I'm guessing most of you in here are engineers. Is that a fair statement? So some groups I've worked with, the organization outsources a lot of things like design. They'll say, we have this great idea. Some other company is going to design it, and then we'll write the code, and then we'll deploy it and support it. In those examples, the constraint is never the operations side of things. The constraint is the design, because the design's done by somebody else, and we don't have an idea of why they did it a certain way or how things are working. And so if we optimize deployment, but we don't solve the problems upstream, we're just deploying junk faster. And I don't think that's really a good idea. And so we're trying to get teams to think about how do all of the skills that you need to be successful to deliver value to your customers, how do they actually affect each other? Everybody knows the idea of technical debt, right? It's the person before you who's code, right? That's kind of what you inherited. The majority of places I go, well, don't get me wrong, there's engineers that take shortcuts all the time. And that's just, to me, that's not technical debt, that's just kind of cruft. That's just kind of writing bad code. But a lot of places I go, the engineers are doing the best they can. But the problem is, because the ideas aren't vetted well on the left side of the value stream, that after the engineers build things, the product tries to find fit. And so they just rapidly say, I don't know, try this. I don't know, try this. I don't know, try this. And so then the code becomes nasty because you never had a good, solid idea to start with. And you just kind of reacted and reacted and reacted. But if we don't talk about the whole value stream and we just say deploy it faster and we don't solve the systemic problems, you're going to continuously have technical debt build up because you're not thinking about if I should even write code in the first place. So when I think about these dojos, I want the whole value stream. I want the teams to understand how do we actually know we should actually write code before we write code, and then have infrastructure that allows us to experiment against it and not just continuously build junk faster. Sorry on the rant. All right, here's the other thing we're going for. So we need holistic learning. We also are trying to create this space where like learning is what we do, right? Like we all work in complex domains where things are constantly changing. So we need to be able to learn. If you're all at this conference, and that's awesome, But if you're like when I was at this Futures and Options Exchange in Chicago, we were a learning organization. And you could tell we were because everybody got 40 hours a year to learn. Well, let's just think about that mathematically. If over the course of a year you got 1 day every 3 months to learn, statistically speaking, the majority of the time it's business as usual. You are not learning anything. You're just kind of going through the motions and it's business as usual. So what we're trying to do in these dojos is make it so learning is always what's happening. We actually embrace wrongness. And we say, if we're going to be wrong, how do we learn faster? How do we learn safer? And it's just a change of thinking that it's helpful for a lot of teams. So we're trying to create this space where learning is what's always happening. Here's a fun one. Anybody guess what that is? There you go. It's a tattoo. More explicitly, it's my arm. I put this up for a couple reasons. One, I like my tattoo artist. But when I was talking to my tattoo artist, this gentleman named Ben in Chicago, I said, kind of like, how do you get going with tattooing? I go, you don't just, you're a good artist. You don't just say, I can draw really good. Let me pick up this thing and jam it in people's arms. I go, there's got to be a way through this. And he goes, oh, yeah. You got to tattoo various objects. He talked about tattooing oranges and grapefruits and all those kinds of things. And he had to kind of learn how inks react, and he had to observe people and see how various skin tones take different types of ink, and he had to learn things before he could actually do things. I think if you compare that to how we do things in a lot of organizations, look, if you're ever going to get a tattoo, and you ask your tattoo artist how he learned how to tattoo, and he goes, I don't know, I got Confluence up, I'm going to figure it out right now. Don't get that tattoo, right? Like, I think that's a safe bet. But yet in a lot of organizations, you're doing a lot of complex things, and the answer is, I don't know, we wrote it down. Go read it. But the problem is just because you read it doesn't mean you know how it works, or you know how to make it work for you, or you know how to evolve it. So this idea of scaling knowledge by writing it down, like, look, I can't pour knowledge in this bottle and pass it to you, and now you have the knowledge. You have to create it yourself, and the way you create knowledge is through experiences. So yeah, if nothing else, take away, don't get the tattoo from the Confluence tattoo artist. So this is what we're trying to do with these dojos. We're trying to make it so teams are coming together, they're learning things, they learn how various skills impact other skills. They learn how what they're doing works inside context. We're making it so learning is what's happening all the time. It's not just, today we're going to learn, and then for the next 2 weeks we're going to cry. We're going to learn, and we're going to experiment, and we're going to figure things out, and we're going to move together as a team. And then it's this idea of scaling knowledge through experience. You can't just write things down, right? There aren't, in playbooks are nice, but you have to experience them. And so we're trying to make it so teams are experiencing things. So then we get into the dojo. So here's the dojo kind of in a nutshell. And I'll walk you through it a bit to make it make more sense. You'll see at the top there it says 2.5-day sprints. As mentioned earlier, I do some of the Agile stuff. I can tell you this, when teams are inside their experience inside the dojo, it's not about like Agile stuff. I mean, you'll see up there they do sprints and plannings and demos and all that kind of stuff. But look, if you have 2.5 days to build something, all of the Agile ceremony has to kind of go out the window, right? You can't spend an hour for a stand-up and 4 hours planning and then have 4 hours pre-planning, because then you're done, and you didn't do anything but plan a lot of stuff. So what we do within these teams, and you'll see some of these slides later on, it's really just kind of like just enough discussion, just enough planning to move forward. There's no, this idea of estimating how big work is kind of out the window. Today is Monday, we're going to demo it on Wednesday. Can we finish it? Nope, too big. I don't care if it's a 5 or a 9 or 2 ponies and a unicorn. It doesn't matter, it's too big. So some of these ceremonies just go away, and all the nonsense around what did you do yesterday, what did you do today, the only thing stopping me is too many meetings, blah, blah, blah. It kind of goes away, because you kind of have to cut to the chase and get things done. So I'll get more into this learning space, but this is how teams actually come into the experience. teams become aware of the dojo. So call it an overview. In essence, somebody has to know that this thing exists. They have to know kind of what happens. Teams are going to learn stuff. They have to be aware of it. Again, so that might happen like 2 or 3 weeks before a team actually comes into the dojo. Before a team will come in, we actually sit down and talk to them. Usually what happens, the reason why this is one-to-many, is usually the first time it's somebody's manager saying, my team's really bad, they gotta go learn stuff. That's great, dude. I wanna talk to your team first. So that's why it's one-to-many. But we need to talk to the managers. We need to make sure they understand that, look, this is, when they're in here, it's not about go faster. It's actually about slow down and learn things. And so the managers and everybody else has to get on board. Stuff's going to slow down. We're going to do stuff. People are going to learn things. You got to be cool with it. But before a team will come further, we have to actually talk to the whole team. Hey, you're going to be with us for 6 weeks, 8 hours a day. We're going to learn stuff. This is we're going to work on your work. Sometimes I have to get a little kind of harsh with teams. Meaning that when you're inside the dojo, it's this idea of a team learning together. So I don't care if one person's super smart and they want to work on their own. I got to kind of say, hey, that's not how it's going to happen. We got to work on this stuff together. So we got to set expectations that there aren't any these firefighters going to happen. Assuming teams are cool and they still want to come in, we do this idea of chartering. So if I talk about consultations, about setting expectations for the team, you're going to be here for 8 hours, for 6 weeks. We're going to work on these things. What do you want to learn? How are we going to do it? That's the idea behind consulting, the consult phase. When we get into chartering, this is, again, before a team starts in the space, maybe a day or two, maybe 3 days. It's about making sure the team's aligned. They know the problem they're going to work on. They know the things they want to learn. They know how they're going to define success. You can't just say, I want to come in the dojo because I want a pipeline. I actually want to know how the pipeline is going to help you. And how would you know the pipeline's good? And we're going to ask these kinds of things so the team can be very concrete about the things they want to learn. Also, sometimes in these chartering sessions, we'll look at architecture. We'll look at permissions, and we'll look at these other things to say if the team has homework they need to get done before they come in. Team comes into the dojo, we go through some planning stuff, and then we kind of just rip into building things and learning along the way. The 2.5 day, take out the 2.5 day thing. Just think you're, in essence, have 2 sprints a week. 2 sprints, it's not like some magical thing that we just kind of did a bunch of math and said, well, we should do 2 sprints a week. It was actually just kind of what happened. But a lot of nice things come out of it because, like I mentioned, the sizing stuff goes out the window. A lot of other things kind of go out the window. From a ceremony standpoint, you can actually just get to the essence of discussions and building things. The other thing that's really nice about this is that, oh, geez, I lost my train of thought. The thing that's nice about this is that small space, that 2.5 days, is like just enough for people to feel comfortable trying something new without feeling they wasted a lot of time. I had a buddy that used to say, the difference between learning and failure is cost. If we spent a lot of money on it and it was wrong, that was a failure. But if we spent a little bit of money on it and we failed, then we learned it. I was like, that's a nice way of thinking about it. So this 2.5 day thing, there's been plenty of times teams get wrapped around the axle around like, there was 6 different ways we could do it. Okay, let's pick one and see what we learn from it. And if we're wrong, man, 2 days. I waste way more than 2 days over the course of my career. We can waste 2 days trying to learn something new. So it creates this kind of safe space where it's like, it's safe to learn and try things. The ceremony goes away. The other thing that's interesting, we'll talk more about it later in the deck, as soon as you go down to like this 2.5 day sprint thing, all of these organizational things blow up. In a lot of organizations, what happens is, at least a lot of organizations I see, yours may vary. You're doing some work, and then you hit a block. I don't want to call it a blocker, but that feels too agilely. Usually you get to a space where like you don't have permission, you don't have access, you don't have enough information, you can't do something, you can't make progress. So you stop. And nobody stops. We just start the next thing. And then we get a little bit further on that, and then we stop that thing because we can't make any progress, and we start the third thing, we start the fourth thing. And maybe over the course of a few weeks, they magically all line up. But what's interesting about that is we're trying to solve an information problem by creating a queuing problem, right? Instead of finishing one thing, we're going to start 4 things because I don't have enough information to finish anything. And eventually, I'll get more information and I can make progress. If you're trying to do these things in 2.5 days, especially when somebody actually paying attention to this, you got to solve the information problems. I'm adamant I don't want to create queuing problems. I don't want people just to have lots of things started. That's one thing I'll stress in the consultation with groups. You're not here to start things, you're here to finish things. And that's hard for a lot of groups. So like, if you're trying to deploy something to AWS and you can't do it because security says you got to fill out that form and then wait 5 days before I review it, yeah, that's not a team's problem, dude. That's a problem that the organization has to figure out, because if you want to go faster and you want teams to do these things, you got to solve these problems. You got to solve the information, not the problem, not the queuing, not creating a queuing problem. So these 2.5 day things are super nice because they expose these problems, they create safe spaces for teams to experiment, and they make it so we can focus on the essence of the things we want to learn and build. Teams do this for a while. When they get near the end, we do this little exit interview. We make sure teams are supported when they leave, and they're ready to kind of keep their learning going. Over the course of those 6 weeks, the teams are there with us. They're working with somebody that can do things. Look, I just kind of play them. Look, I think you can tell I'm an open book. I've been plenty of places where like they might have like a Scrum Master kind of thing, and the Scrum Master will come in and say, oh, this team's bad. I've never written any code, but you should write some tests. And then they walk away. That really doesn't work so good. Turns out you need people that know how to do things. And so like in this dojo, if you're teaching people things, you have to be able to do it. So when teams are learning new things, they're working with people that know how to do it. And they not only do they know how to do it, they know how to teach it. Now, over the course of 6 weeks, that person has to peel back their time so the team becomes more independent. But early on, it's a lot of teaching and facilitating until the team becomes cohesive and ready to jam and learn these things on their own. That's a picture of me actually doing it. That's fine. We were teaching some groups. This was actually like an overview and trying to get more people into that Texas dojo space. You will get to a point where you need to figure out how to choose teams for your dojo. I'll tell you this: if you're doing this space, you're going to choose teams that are strategically important for your organization, right? Like if you're going to the cloud, pick teams that are going to the cloud. Don't choose the mainframe teams, right? Just kind of like that kind of stuff. If you're going to invest in a dojo, I would recommend you invest in your employees, not in your contractors. It just seems like a good idea. I know, right? It seems like if you're going to help people learn things, help your people. What I like about that is everybody talks about cultural transformations, right? I've seen it work with this, where all of a sudden you're investing in your employees and you're investing in their learning and you're creating a culture where like they can experiment. That's a nice thing, so invest in your people. This is a quick picture after you choose some teams, me walking through some teams around what they actually wanted to learn. What I thought was interesting about this group, it was, I think it was 5 engineers, there's some extra people around. It was 5 engineers and 1 tester. And so the engineers kept on saying, we need to get automation so testing can test sooner because they take too long to test. And I was like, wow. And so you can see like that big red kind of loop at the bottom, and it was just kind of like, what if we tested sooner? I was like, I didn't think we could do that. We can, we have the technology, right? We can show you how to do this. But it's walking these teams through these things, and we're rethinking, before they start, we're rethinking about how we want to approach this with them. What do you want to learn? What's going to help you, and what's the impact it's going to have? So this is helping us frame up what they're going to learn and before they come in. And here's this again, before the team comes in, this is this idea of chartering to make sure the team is aligned around what they're going to do. This might, look, I'm not going to lie to you. This sometimes takes about 2 hours. I've had times it takes 6 hours. I've had times where we start and we just say, we can't finish this. There's easy things in a charter, which you can't even see here because they're so easy. The first thing I ask a team for is a name. What's the name of your team? Give me a metaphor of the work you use. Some teams, like the cool teams, have chosen like Cloud Talica. We're going to the cloud, but it's kind of metal. That's kind of fun. If a team can't agree upon a name, there's no way they're going to agree upon what they want to learn. So that's just kind of like my test for the group. Like, can you agree upon a name? We'll talk about any kind of constraints they have. But we started this idea of an elevator pitch. Why are you here? Lots of teams can tell me what they want to build, but they can't tell me why. I had one engineer, he got super pissed at me on Monday, last week. He had this piece of work, and it was put more data on the screen, right? There's already 8 fields on a screen. The work said now he has to put 8 more on there. And he goes, I can do this really fast. I go, but why are you doing it? And he goes, because they asked me to put more data on the screen. And I was like, look, dude, I'm not trying to be rude, but when somebody's asking for data, they're trying to answer a question. What's the question they're trying to answer? I don't know, but it's just a couple annotations in the code. I don't care, dude. If you don't know what the question is, you don't just go off and build it. It's just you got to get to the essence of these problems. So this guy got super frustrated, and I get it because it's a challenging question, and part of it's on me. But teams have to understand the problem they're solving, because you can solve a problem multiple ways, but you have to understand the problem. Otherwise, everything is noise, and that's why some of these things take a while. Why are we actually here? Not the things we're trying to build, but what's the problem we're solving? We'll have them talk about goals and measures. How do you know you're successful? I'm a big test-driven guy. This, to me, is the first introduction for tests for the group. Imagine it's 6 weeks from now and you're leaving the dojo. Give me the tests that I know you're successful. And if you can't do it, then we got to figure that out. When we do this, lots of teams have ideas. I want to deploy faster. I want to have less defects. Okay, what's your baseline? Oh, I don't have baselines. Okay, well, so step 1 is get baselines, and it's kind of work from there. And this isn't bad on teams. It's just they want the right things, but if you can't compare it to something, you don't know if you made a difference. So we go through those things. We talk about how teams are going to work together. This is a fun one. And so even if you don't do a dojo, I think this is a cool idea. This idea of a skills matrix. You get your team together, and you say, we're about to do this thing. We're trying to get these outcomes. What are the skills we need amongst our group to be successful to get this kind of outcome? And you lay them across there as column headings. For the rows, you have everybody's name. And then I would go through with the group, and I would say, this legend is actually wrong, so imagine there wasn't check marks. I would say you got 2 choices. You either know it well enough to teach it to somebody else. If you do that, give it an X. If you want to learn it, give it a circle. If you don't care about it, leave it blank. So I guess there is 3 options. But this is nice because immediately everybody sees what the team needs to be successful. They see who has the skills, and they see how they can help each other. If it's an X, I can teach it to somebody else. If it's an O, I want to learn it. Let's just kind of pair you up and make some magic happen. The reason why I do that is the reason why I don't like the third option of the check mark being I know it, but I can't teach it. Because look, you're all engineers, put everybody in front of a room, all of a sudden everybody's a check mark, right? So I like it to be very one side or the other. You can either teach it, or you want to learn more about it. And now everybody sees, not everybody knows everything, everybody sees they can help each other or somebody else, and it just creates these nice learning environments. I also use this as a means for myself to figure out where I need to help the team the most, right? So if I see there's not an X in a column, I know I need to be a little bit stronger, I need to be more focused with the team in that space. But again, regardless of what you do, I think that's a nice, cool thing to show teams, like, this is how you be successful, this is how you help each other. It's just a nice kind of mantra to kind of get going in teams. After chartering, teams come in to the dojo. We start off with a little bit of planning, kind of lightweight, right? So we're doing these 2 sprints a week. I kind of mentioned to you, it's not about points and estimates and unicorns and Legos and this kind of stuff. It's just kind of like, what's the next most interesting thing? That's how I frame up all the 2 days for the groups. Right now we're here. What's the next most interesting thing for us to achieve as a group? And then what do we need to learn to get there? It's not you got 2 hours and you got 2 hours and you got 4 hours. How do we cram 8 hours worth of work into you? It's what's the next interesting thing for our group? How do we get there? What's our next best investment? I think the language is just nicer. So teams will just continuously talk about these things around, right now we have a pipeline that goes to production, but it's not running tests or lints. It would be really cool if we were able to get some of these things in and a little bit of notification. So they can talk about these things, and they say, we don't know how to do notifications, we don't know how to do these things. So they talk about what they want to have happen, and then they talk about what they want to learn to get there. It's just easier. This is the fun one, and my apologies to Chef because it says Ansible up there. This is 2 just examples of what could happen in a dojo. So just to be explicit, there is no playbook, there is no curriculum. Every place I go, somebody asks me, what's my team going to learn on day 3? I don't know. I don't know what they're going to learn on day 3 because I don't know what they know today and I don't know what they need. So every team is different. Just to show you 2 kind of different examples around what teams have learned in dojos. This is a team that was doing a pure cloud migration. So of course, the first was just kind of come up with some kind of strategy, learn a little bit about Ansible and deployments, learn how to build up a little bit of infrastructure, a little bit of databases, and kind of continuously over time. The top one is more product-oriented, building APIs and microservices and deployments. But what's interesting about this, if you were to take courses for this, it's kind of a lot of courses. For whether it's top or the bottom, it's kind of a lot of stuff. And look, no one's coming out of this thing after 6 weeks an expert in 10 topics, but they've touched 10 topics, and they've done it for their work. And they know how they did it, and they've experienced it, and they'll keep it going forward. As opposed to I had a sandbox, and I learned how to deploy EC2, but then security won't let me touch anything. It's just a different approach. Again, no playbooks, no curriculum. Find out what the team needs, and you end up continuously adjusting the plan as you go. But one team's experience will be drastically different than another team's experience. Then teams leave. We have to make sure they're going to be successful and supported, right? Everybody has to feel happy. Sometimes it's as easy as some teams have just said, look, we don't have whiteboards in our space, and so when we leave the dojo, we don't have any ways of actually writing things down and sharing, and so we help them get whiteboards. Other times it's well, this is really good, but now once I leave, we're all going to go back to 5 different teams. And that's not a team problem. Again, it's a problem for the organization. But we have to figure out how to support teams when they leave so they keep the momentum going around experimentation and learning. And this is a fun one. So this is probably pretty hard to read, right? But it talks about values, practices, and tools. Thanks, dude. A lot of places we go, these dojos, they want to learn tools. They want to learn Jenkins. They want to learn AWS and CloudBees and Chef and all these kinds of things. We don't just necessarily start with tools. We tell teams tools are volatile. You have to understand practices. But before you can actually do practices, you have to have values. Turns out not a lot of teams have values. So we have to stress values around what the purpose of doing things. Because the values should be constant. You should always want certain things, and then your practices will change, and you grow your practices over time. And your tools are always going to be volatile, because the next biggest thing is going to happen. But if you understand what you're looking for in a tool, it's easier to make that change than it is to just kind of say, I don't know what's going on over here. Everything's different. Let me rip through this a little bit faster here. Last thing here for you, the dojo space, we do a lot of things from Jenny's book. But it's meant to be a different space. I had one team in Milwaukee. They came in and they said, this feels like a startup. And it's yeah, it should, because we want it to feel different, so you need to think different. So this is a wonderful book. The only thing I'll tell you that's, I think Jenny mentions in her book, we actually talk about density of teams. In the best dojos I've been in, we actually have 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 teams close to each other, so close that they can hear each other. And it's bordering on annoying. The reason being is that you actually want teams to hear what's happening, and you want them to say, I just experienced that 2 weeks ago. Let me help you with it. That's how you get kind of like that organic network of learners happening, as opposed to like always expecting somebody to tell you what to learn. So you want this kind of density where teams are close to each other and they want to help each other. So there you go, there's the flow. Teams come in for 6 weeks. All the learning is adaptive. We'll make sure teams are ready to come in, support them when they leave, and make sure the space is cool. All right, let me get into this impact real quick, then we get to how to start it. If you try and do these dojos, even though your organization may say it's a learning organization, as soon as you slow down to learn, people are going to get weird. I highly suggest you set expectations early on. I tell teams, look, if you plan for normally 6 weeks worth of work, come into the dojo and plan for 3, just to kind of create a buffer. Most of the teams that come through the dojo end up doing more than they normally would because they actually solve some systemic problems, they actually learn things, they actually cut out a lot of the cruft. But you can't tell managers, we're going to do 12 weeks worth of work, otherwise the second day they're going to say it's too slow. I did have one group, this manager got super pissed at me because her designer wanted to learn HTML as part of the dojo. She called me up and she laid into me. How dare you have my designer learn HTML and style sheets? And this is the best part. She's not even that good of a designer. She shouldn't be learning HTML. And I was like, wow, that's not on me. That's on you. Like, you know. But that's, so this woman called me back the next day and she said she couldn't sleep all night because of how she reacted. And that's not her being bad. It's like she's in this place where like learning wasn't embraced in the organization. So I'm just telling you, like, it's going to get weird. Just be ready for these things. All of your constraints, when you go down from into these super small focused things of trying to finish units of value in 2 days, all of your constraints are getting magnified. I've had numerous fights with security. And look, security are great people. But like, if I have a front-end engineer sitting next to me, and I have the services engineer sitting next to me, and like, security says they can't see each other's code, it's kind of silly, right? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And so I get in those kind of arguments all the time. The same kind of thing if like you have the forms for like getting access to environments that have to be reviewed but are never reviewed, you know, like that kind of stuff. So all these constraints are going to blow up. Just be ready for it before you get into it because you're going to need some support on how to address those things. And this is a fun one. This is a picture of an idea called Delta Next from a buddy of mine, Jeff Patton. But most places I go, organizations assume they're always right. If we build it, they will buy it. Turns out that's not the case a lot. So I'm just telling you, like, this idea of IT needs to go faster is going to get exposed pretty quick, right? Sometimes it's not just IT has to go faster. Sometimes it's like we actually have to know what we're doing from a product side. So you're going to find these biases are going to blow up. Be ready to address them. So get ready for those impacts. Let me get you through these things so we get to questions. So now you're all jazzed. I can tell by the smiles. You're going to go back and start your own. How are you going to start? Figure out where you where you want to focus. Look, you can't teach everybody everything, especially in your first team. So like figure out what the thing is you want to teach teams is, and then make sure you have people that can teach those things. Sounds obvious? Plenty of places don't do it. They just say, we want a dojo. What are you going to teach? Everything. Who's going to come? Everybody. Bad idea. Have a focus. Have a purpose. If you can't have a space, go to the teams. If it's in a cube farm, it's going to suck, but just, kind of do what you can. And look, this is not a pitch for me. I can tell you this. What's going to make your teams have good experiences inside the dojo is actually having somebody that can teach. Not a lot of people can teach. There's a lot of good engineers that can tell you how to do it. That's different than teaching. You have to understand how far it is to let somebody go, and they're not going to, how far off the rails they can go without, falling into the ocean. And not a lot of people, not a lot of engineers are ready for that. They want to just show the answer as opposed to guiding it and teaching it. So just be aware of these things. You're going to need to have good people that can teach. And there you go. These slides will be ready for you. Start your own stuff. Know what you're doing, what you're focusing on, and have good people ready to go. We write on stuff. I got a book coming out about all these things in a little bit. We did this webinar for IT Revolution a couple years back that I sound better on that than I do here. So that's that. All right, because I got like 3 minutes left. What questions do you all have? What do you got, dude? What's the good size? The question was, what's a good size for a team? Yeah. I mean, like, usually, so I'll give you the easy answer is, like the 4 to 10 kind of range. I've had teams come in as large as 50. Yeah, it's possible. You just kind of have to put a little more kind of orientation around it and kind of help them understand how to come together as a large group and how to go into small groups. I've done it, up to 50, but usually it's always in that 4 to 10 space. Yep. Back here, real quick.
In this environment, how do you accommodate people when they have accessibility issues? If they're neurodiverse and can't be like that close to people, or other types of accessibility issues?
That's a great question. Honestly, I haven't encountered it, so I don't, unfortunately, even have a good answer for it. Yeah, sorry. Do you have a question, dude?
As a consultant, we go in and try to help companies with DevOps transformations.
Yeah, transformation.
Yeah, DevOps transformation. So we find that the company's not willing to stop work to go do something you've suggested. They'll give you everyone's lunch hour. All right, we'll have a lunch and learn. Everybody, come, we'll order food. So what kind of time frame would you have us suggest to spend, like how often, how much time at one sitting? Because some people are going to come in and say, okay, this isn't for me, and leave.
Yeah.
Some people are going to be on other projects that can't attend, and it's not like it's a thing that they can dedicate to, because companies just won't let them.
We'll let them do it, yeah. Again, dude, that's a great, so the question is, if organizations want to invest in kind of like the time for people to do these things, kind of what do you do? Is that a fair reframe?
Yeah, the company's not invested because they've got all these different teams and they've got deadlines to put projects out. They think it's a great idea, but okay, so how do you try to give them a schedule? Okay, I need this much time across this many days.
Yeah. So my easy answer for you is I don't, because if somebody wants to do this, they kind of have to, for me, if a company wants to do it, they have to go all in. As soon as, I've been in places where like we give teams the option. Instead of being there for 6 weeks and 5 days a week and 8 hours a day, you can come for 3 hours a day, twice a week. The challenge is you're kind of allowing the organization to stay dysfunctional. And what's going to happen is if you only get 3 hours a day, you can't do multiple skills, you can't interweave things, you got to kind of focus on one thing. Today is going to be this thing, and it doesn't work. Me personally, I just walk away. I've kicked teams out of the dojo because I was like, this is just dumb, wasting my time. That got me in a lot of arguments too, but good question though. One last, what do you got, dude?
Thanks. So I get the sense that it's often like a whole team exercise with design and product and front end and back end or whatever the split might be. Have you had experience with maybe there's that organization is not using like the whole team ethos and they just have an API team? Like have you ever had that kind of thing?
Yeah. A great question. So ideally it's a whole team, kind of like soup to nuts kind of thing. Sometimes it's not. And so like in your perfect example, dude, before a team came in that was an API team, I was talking with them and I go, what are your biggest constraints? And they go, it's the database changes. I go, okay, how does that work? Well, we submit a ticket to the DBAs. I go, okay, what's going to be different in the dojo? I don't know. We thought we'd figure out, how to submit tickets faster. I'm like, that's not going to work. So I've been in a place where it's like, even in the example, it wasn't even kind of left side of product stuff. It was just APIs and databases. And so we got a couple people together from the teams, 2 different teams, to say, can we figure out a better way of working across teams? That's been a nice thing to do. Yeah. That's why that consult's important, because we want to make sure we get the right team and we want to get the right group, not just the kind of the manager's reports. Good question. Are we out of time? One more?
We can do no more.
We can do no more? Yeah, what do you got, dude?
Our whole organization's supposed to be implementing dojos. I mean, or is it just like a team? There's a specific focus. We're going to put the resources together and try to solve this problem.
Yeah.
If you're in a large organization, does it require everyone to reorganize how it's set up?
Yeah. It does. So yeah, so like the question was, if it's a large organization, is it just it's just one team, or is it kind of the whole organization, rethinking how they do things? It is. It's the whole organization, dude. Like I can tell you this. I did this thing back in last month up in Minneapolis. There's this thing called the Dojo Consortium, which look, this is not about me. Like these companies created this thing called a consortium. There's 35 of the Fortune 100 companies came together in Minneapolis because they're all trying to do this. And so yeah, it's not just a team. It's like, how do we get everybody through it? You don't get it. You don't have 100 teams doing it at a time. You got to kind of figure out the right cadence and the right size and the right pace for these teams. But organizations are doing it because the teams get better. The organizations are trying to figure out how to restructure the organization to actually effectively flow value. And this is the best way to find out. Get the team together. What's getting in their way? If it's 5 teams to get one product done, it shouldn't be 5 teams anymore. We got to rethink these things. And so it's just a nice ecosystem to experiment and get the right thing going. Organizations are going all in on this. Target's one's been going for like 5 years. Verizon's been going for 3 years. I think Capital One's been going for 6 years. I mean, there's a lot of big companies that have been doing this for a while. Good question. I'll be around for about another hour, and then I'm going to go to the airport and fly to another place. So thank you all. Talk to you soon.